panelists on 3x5 cards. There are a number of Ottawa County Patriot members and officers around the room. If you could stand up so that people recognize you. They have 3.5x5 cards. Ask them, they'll be moving around the room during the panelist discussion. Ask them for a card to write down the questions and hand them to the members. After the panelists are done, there'll be a recess and we'll collect those cards, and then I will distribute the questions and the comments to the panelists for their responses and reactions. We've allocated about an hour for that because we, the Ottawa County Patriots, believe that it's important for as many citizens as possible to engage in a discussion with one another, and today with the panelists, on matters that are important to them. And then we have another 5-minute recess, and that's for the panelists to collect their thoughts and to provide us with 5 minutes each of their summary of what they think they've heard and learned, and perhaps other comments during this evening. And then I will make a few remarks at the end, not so much about the Dewey Hill Cross or about the Hager Park sign, but about the Ottawa County Patriots. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists to you. Sitting here on the left, I guess that's the right-hand side of the table for you people out there, is the Reverend Tyler Wagonmaker. He is an ordained pastor in the Christian Reformed Church and a native of Western Michigan. He graduated from Calvin College, majoring in history and in secondary ed. Later, he attended Westminster Theological Seminary and Calvin Theological Seminary and earned a Master of Divinity degree. He joined the United States Army, became an Army chaplain, and served in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was awarded the Bronze Star. He is currently the pastor of Beaver Dam CRC in Hudsonville and is active in the civic affairs of his community. Sitting next to the Reverend Tyler Maker is Mr. Douglas Van Essen. He is an attorney and is also a native of Western Michigan. He also graduated from Calvin College. It seems like a very good school. He obtained his law degree from Notre Dame in 1981. He has been admitted to the bar in multiple jurisdictions and is qualified to practice law before various courts, including the United States Supreme Court. He has won a variety of awards and recognitions for excellence in the practice of law. He's currently a principal with the firm of Silver and Van Essen and is presently serving as the General Litigation Counsel for the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners, among other roles. Sitting next to him is Mr. Stephen Coleman. He is also an attorney and another native of Michigan. Michigan produces some good people. He graduated from Michigan State University and then obtained his law degree from Cooley Law School in 2011. He is the third-generation member in the family legal firm of the Coleman Legal Group, located in Lansing, Michigan, and he is also a member of the Great Lakes Justice Center. He has been active both privately and professionally on a wide range of civic topics and has testified before the Michigan legislature regarding the federal Constitution. And lastly, on the far end, is Mr. Brandon Hall. He is a lifelong resident of the Grand Haven area. He is currently a political consultant and runs a political website, West Michigan Politics. He has run for elected office and became the youngest ever member of the Grand Haven School Board. More recently, he has organized the Save the Grand Haven Cross Nativity PAC, Political Action Committee, and is currently organizing an effort to recall, that is to unelect, a member of the Grand Haven City Council. I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. I just introduced the panelists. Now for a bit of background on the Grand Haven Dewey Hill Cross. You can see the city of Grand Haven began the display of the cross on Dewey Hill during the 4th of July and Coast Guard and Christmas holiday celebrations in 1964. In 1999, the city of Grand Haven began to limit the display of the cross. In 2014, MACRA, that's the Michigan Association of Civil Rights Activists, challenged any further display of the cross, and they threatened litigation. That triggered the first community forum, which was held last October, next door at the library, and it was moderated by the Grand Haven Tribune and hosted by the library. In 2015, January of 2015, the city of Grand Haven ordered the permanent conversion of the cross to an anchor. In 1960, the Hager family donated forest land to Ottawa County for a park. And they also donated a rock plaque and a sign which were erected in the park. And the sign quotes the first verse of Psalm 19 in the Old Testament: "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork." In 2014, MACRA petitioned for removal of the sign, and again they threatened litigation. The County Parks Department took the sign down. And then, in 2015, the County Board of Commissioners held a number of closed and public hearings, and then ordered the sign restored and augmented. That's a very brief summary of the events. If anybody is thinking about getting a Surface tablet, think again. For everybody's benefit, I've put up on the screen the text of the First Amendment, the first adopted amendment to our federal Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. And that First Amendment was loomed large in the discussions last October, and then again in December and January of this year before the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners. I also wanted to share with you again what I see as the central position of MACRA on these matters. Now let me say a little bit about MACRA before we get further into the discussion. They were a principal in the discussions last October on the Dewey Hill Cross, and they participated, a number of them did, at the forum at that time. I personally invited them to participate again. I talked to Ms. Cayley, I talked to Holly Huber, and they both declined to participate, as did Mr. Plesher. And I won't go into why. I wish they could have been here today to continue the discussion, but they chose not to. However, they are continuing to press for the removal of the sign in Hager Park, and have applauded the planned conversion of the cross permanently to an anchor in Grand Haven here. Their motivation is summarized in the statement that I have here on the screen. Government promoting religion is not a good thing. So I'd ask the panelists to consider a number of questions, a number of general questions. Did MACRA do the right thing? Did the Grand Haven Council do the right thing? Did the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners do the right thing? And then to think about the question, what further steps would be proper for those who would challenge or defend the Dewey Hill Cross and the Hager Park sign? Now, let me just clarify one thing. I've shared these questions with the panelists before the evening, so these are not coming as a surprise to them. I hope. There are some issues behind the question. Some of these have been explored before, and some of them haven't been. Are the challenges to the Dewey Hill Cross and the Hager Park sign unprecedented? If they're not unprecedented, how do earlier challenges and responses inform our situation today? Are there common elements in the events surrounding Dewey Hill Cross and the Hager Park sign? And should any challenges to or defenses of the Dewey Hill Cross and the Hager Park sign be kept separate? Or should they be combined in some way? In talking to our fellow citizens, and I've talked to a lot of them about these subjects, one of the most recurring themes can be summarized in what I have on this chart. Is MACRA attempting to bully communities by threatening expensive legal actions? What is bullying? But given we understand what that is, inviting the panelists if they'd like to speak to that, is MACRA bullying our community? And what is the proper response to bullying by an individual and by a community? I've mentioned the word community several times. Are communities real? Do our laws recognize the reality of communities? And, given answers to those questions, does the First Amendment protection of the freedom of expression extend to communities, or does it apply solely to individuals? Is the expression of any belief by an individual or a community coercive? Is the simple expression of a belief coercive? Is the expression of a belief by a local government, even by using a local government it creates and maintains, coercive? Does it constitute the establishment of religion? Now, the U.S. Constitution does prohibit any law establishing religion. So does this prohibition suggest that there must be no involvement whatsoever between church and state? And is now I've put up here on the screen what I believe to be the Supreme Court's current position on that, and I have a number of citations of decisions that could back this up, and maybe the lawyers will correct me when we get to this. But the First Amendment mandates government neutrality between religion, and between religion and non-religion. Can government legally prohibit or promote beliefs without establishing religion? Now, regardless of the legality of that, question, should governments do so? And lastly, as an example, does the Pledge of Allegiance promote any beliefs? We've used the word several times now, religion, so it might be worthwhile to spend a few minutes answering the question, what is religion and what is a religion? And is the rejection of all theistic and deistic religions, in other words, atheism and secularism, is that a religion itself? And does a legal prohibition of all theistic or deistic religious expressions in public places constitute the establishment of atheism or secularism? And does this violate the First Amendment to the Constitution? And lastly, is the Supreme Court infallible? Has it ever made a mistake? And has it ever corrected a mistake it previously made? In light of those questions, should the matter of the Dewey Hill Cross and the Hager Park sign be resolved by the Supreme Court? So now I want to give each of the panelists, and I have my, it's not a microphone, this is a Samsung device, this Android device, it keeps good time. And I'm going to ask you to give each of the panelists 10 minutes, and we're going to start with the Reverend Tyler Wagonmaker here, and we'll proceed down the line. Thank you. So,
Michael, could you show that clip first to start us out, and
sure.
then we'll go from there. It's just a quick, brief 35-second or so clip from the New York Times.
إزالة التماثيل وطمسها، وفعل ذلك الصحابة من بعدهم لما فتحوا البلدان.
Okay. Started out with that. Actually, this is the New York Times also from that day, Friday, February 27, just very recent. One of their headlines is ISIS onslaught overruns Assyrians and wrecks art. And, some of that is certainly current news. You saw examples of that. Brings back to mind even when Mr. Van Essen was making a case in regards to the Board of Commissioners about the whole issue of religious freedom. And he brought up the issue of ISIS, for instance, and religious freedom for Christians who are beheaded, and how the United States, we don't establish religion here. And so we have safety from government, that government's not going to come along and behead us. The whole issue of ISIS brings this matter up, though, as we think about what was happening here. This was a destruction. We see this no matter what your faith. You see this, and most people greatly lament what was done here. The destruction of great historical, cultural artifacts. Many of them religious at the time, actually, of the nation of Assyria, and that were now in Mosul. It just happened like a week ago or so. And we look at it, we say, what kind of people would go into a museum like Mosul and would go and destroy these wonderful, ancient, historical, cultural, important artifacts in the life not only of that region, but in many ways of just world history itself. But then I ask, fundamentally, we have to ask ourselves, what is perhaps so different about what ISIS did there to these historical expressions there in Mosul? And someone perhaps like Mitch Cayley did in Hawaii, and has now done in West Michigan with, on some level, we would say, the destroying of local historical, cultural displays. Just think about it. Both were religious in nature. Now, that was Iraq, that was the Syria region. In both instances, an outside voice came in and said, this is against my doctrine. This is against my beliefs, what is happening here. For these Muslim militants, it's idolatry. It needs to be destroyed. And in fact, you read some of it in the New York Times article here, their justifications for doing it. Very principled reasons of why they thought that great stuff should be destroyed. Mitch Cayley comes in with his very principled reasons why two things, on some level, we could say ought to be destroyed. The cross on Dewey Hill, and a sign that's, both of them been there 50, 55 years or so, there in Hager Park. But we look at that, we say what ISIS did is a brutal attack against civilization. Just another display why we do not like ISIS. But do we say that because ISIS are extreme militant Muslims and on some level they're easy to peg as a religion? Because we can say at least they have truth in advertising. They're saying who they are. They want to impose their religious values on those around them. That's their way of doing that. But then that raises another fundamental question. And the Supreme Court decision so far raises that. The issue of neutrality. Is there such a thing as neutrality? Is there sometimes it's referred to as a public naked square? And I would say on a fundamental level that there is no such thing as a naked public square. Everything conveys in public, individually, community-wise, government-wise, conveys what that individual, what that community, what that government values. about life, and it communicates a certain worldview. Music does that. No matter where you go, in public places, what music is being played, that communicates something. You could say, if archaeologists 2,000 years from now would uncover the ruins of our community, what would they uncover about what we value? They would find malls, they would say where we like to shop. They would find museums, certainly. They'd find Walmarts, they'd find Meijers, they would find parks, they would find governmental type of structures of what government values. Street signs, for instance. Signs indicating on highways, perhaps if they survived, what restaurants, what hotels, what gas stations are there. And when you get that exit, we're a very informational type of society. We value good information. Everything in public communicates something. And what government does or does not do also communicates something. We need to think about when, let's say, we take down a sign, when we take down a cross that has been there for decades. What is that communicating? Because to remove a scripture sign in Hager Park, to remove a cross from Dewey Hill in Grand Haven, is really to replace one form of religious expression with another form of religious expression. Because I would again contend, and many others have contended, there's no such thing as a naked public square. Government always communicates something. There is no such thing as neutrality on some fundamental level, because everything communicates some idea, even the lack of something. You see, governments even will always be forcing on some level a certain worldview upon its people. The question is, which worldview? Is it a worldview of atheism? Removing signs, crosses that have been there for 50, 60 years. By removing that, that communicates at a fundamental level another religion attacking, a religion, perhaps a religious value that has been expressed. The religion of atheism attacking a religion of theism in one instance, just a broad thing of theism, and the Christian faith in another instance there with the cross. What is government going to promote? Atheism? Having no religious symbols on some level is communicating a religion. We are an irreligious society. We don't hold to religion. Not having anything communicates a religion. Will it promote atheism, just a blanket kind of theism? Will a community communicate Christianity, Islam, animism, nature worship? The Christian faith, of course, we know, and I'm sure this will be addressed shortly, has a deep reservoir, deep foundations in our nation. Who we are as a people with our religious liberties are intricately tied with the Christian faith. Think about the value of the Christian expression, of theism even. Because as a society we have to say, since something is always communicated, is it okay if we have a religious expression like a cross, which is explicitly Christian, or a scripture verse which is theistic because it's a verse from the Jewish scriptures as well as the Christian scriptures. It's not endorsing even one particular religion. It's endorsing theism. Since on some level something is going to be communicated, is it okay if we as a culture, as a society, have some examples of religious expression? Overt religious expression, like a sign, like a cross. I would say on some level we can make a sound case that it's okay to have some expressions of that. Especially ones that are deeply embedded in a society, in a culture, in a community with their values. Cross, for instance, here in the Grand Haven, West Michigan area. And we can say that because the Christian religion here, which predominantly has been the religious belief structure, though a lot of variety of denominations, and yet still here in the United States the dominant one, has allowed for a lot of thriving and freedom and leeway. I like to travel, and I love history. A lot of places I go out east, I find I love to go to also old Jewish communities. You find old Jewish synagogues all over the place. I think when I was in Baltimore last fall, stopped in old Jewish community there. Now it's kind of migrated out. There's a synagogue there. That synagogue has been around since the early 1700s. No, that building actually was around since the 1830s or so. But I think of Judaism, for instance, and its freedom in this land. And in many ways we could say it's okay to have some Christian expressions or theistic expressions because that has shown itself to allow for a lot of freedom for other religions here. That we ought not to be threatened as a community by a cross, for instance, because we see, for instance, expressions of Judaism going back to, in fact, the fifth oldest synagogue in the United States is in Grand Rapids, actually. It was established back in the 1700s. So I hear a time frame, and that's perfectly fine. So.
Yeah. Let me apologize. I did not ask you to stand up. I'm going to ask the other panelists to do that. People in the back of the room say, "Who's up there? Who's up there?" So, thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn over the microphone to Mr. Van Essen. If you could stand up for 10 minutes.
Do you mind if I take the podium?
As long as you give it back.
I will give it. I will yield in 10 minutes.
Okay.
I'm getting to the point where I sometimes need something to lean on, in addition to hiding. I want to first of all make sure. How's that? Is that better? All right. I want to make sure everyone understands that I am here in my personal capacity tonight. I am a very experienced attorney. I've represented Tuscola County and the Thumb for 20 years. I am still General Counsel to Nuevo County, just north of here, and have been their General Counsel for 20 years. And I'm also, as has been mentioned, Counsel to Ottawa County. But I want to analogize my situation with Ottawa County here a moment to that of a physician. Pretend I'm, for the moment, Rich DeVos's heart surgeon. And if I were going to attend a panel where we were talking about heart disease, I could talk about many things. But one of the things I could not talk about would be Rich DeVos's particular heart. That's a confidential matter. I wouldn't be allowed to go into it. So unfortunately tonight, I am not going to talk about the Hager sign. Many of you may have read my opinions on the matter. I am Ottawa County's counsel. I'm working with Ottawa County. It would be unprofessional and inappropriate for me to discuss that particular issue in any kind of detail, and I'm going to refrain from that. It doesn't mean, however, that I don't have a lot to offer you tonight. I can answer many of these questions. I have wrestled with many of these questions personally and as a municipal attorney for many other communities. I have had questions such as, can we allow or do we have to allow the KKK to hold a rally on our courthouse steps? I have had to wrestle with the issue of, can we allow a Christmas creche on the courthouse lawn, and if so, for how long? I have actually, I'm not going to plug it here tonight, but if you're interested, I've written a book, a novel on what I view as the identification of evolution with atheism, and how in our public schools it's so intricately linked, those two concepts, evolution and atheism, that without some qualification to teach evolution in the public schools without a disclaimer that indeed there are Christians who believe in evolution, that evolution itself needs to be separated from atheism, or the public schools, by teaching it in an unqualified manner, may be breaking the First Amendment because they're endorsing atheism, which under U.S. constitutional law is itself a religion. And so I feel very strongly about that subject, and I think that's one of the most important issues. If you're interested in this particular issue, that those of us of faith ought to be focused on, because we're directly talking about the communication of ideas to our children in such a way that may promote a particular religion, atheism, in the public schools, and yet it's occurring all the time, and no one's doing anything about that. So I have agreed to participate here because this is a very, very important subject to our communities here, and it could not be more important to the world that we live in right now. And the Reverend has mentioned ISIS. Never have we seen in our lifetime the brilliance of our founding fathers in the First Amendment more graphically illustrated than what's occurring in the Middle East, and the attempt to link religion and state and suppress free speech, the ability to practice religion freely, by linking the concepts of church and state and defeating any effort to disassociate that linkage. Our founding fathers were brilliant, and these concepts, sometimes painful to some of us, of free speech, free exercise of religion, and the separation of church and state are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other. And we are seeing that graphically demonstrated in the Middle East to a horrible extent. So the importance of this issue could not be more relevant to 21st century life here in the United States, and perhaps more acutely in other areas of the world. Is MACRA attempting to bully local communities? I would answer that question no. You can't bully a community. The First Amendment is much broader than that. It enables healthy debate. I don't think any of the Christians who spoke in front of the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners, or any of the religious people who spoke in front of the Grand Haven City Council, or even those who may be exercising their rights to try to unelect certain officials, are bullying anyone. If we're going to allow free speech, it has to be a viable, vigorous allowance. And you can't accuse someone just because they don't believe in the things you believe in of bullying because they're trying to convince a community to do one thing or another. And I'm a lawyer that's been litigating for 34 years. Every day I hear someone threaten litigation. And just because you're threatening litigation doesn't mean you're bullying anyone. So I would answer that no. They're trying to express their viewpoints. I may not agree with them, you may not agree with them, but they're just trying to exercise their rights under the First Amendment. We have had too many people all across the ages in the United States die for that right, for any of us to try to chill the exhibition of that right. Does the First Amendment protections of freedom of expression extend to communities, or is it limited to expressions made by individuals? It's a very good question. And the answer to this is the First Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights adhere to individuals. It's a powerful concept. I watched CNN last night on the Soviet Union and Mr. Putin and what he's doing to that community, obviously not for religious reasons. But no, Russia doesn't have any First Amendment rights. The United States doesn't have any First Amendment rights. Ottawa County doesn't have any First Amendment rights. You do. You do. I do. These are personal rights. Does the Constitution prohibit any government involvement whatsoever in matters of religion? Does it mandate a complete separation of church and state? It mandates a separation of church and state, but there's nothing wrong, for example, in the public schools with a course on comparative religions. As long as the public school doesn't endorse a particular religion, there's nothing wrong with a public teacher explaining what Christianity is in a public school. Now, you may have to explain what Buddhism is, and you may have to explain what Islam is, but the courts have been very clear. Certainly government has a role with religion and has a right to explain religion. It has a responsibility to allow religion. What it cannot do is discourage or endorse any particular religion. How am I doing, Michael?
You've got about 20, 30 seconds left.
All right. Is the rejection of all deistic and theistic religions or belief a religion itself? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I disagree with the Reverend on this point. I think society can be neutral. I really do. But, and to wrap up, I will say this. When you have linkage of a concept like evolution with atheism, and you do not recognize that linkage, then you have a responsibility to maintain neutrality, to disengage that, to have some sort of disclaimer to make sure that people aren't confused and are thinking you as the state are endorsing a particular religion, whatever that religion is. Thank you. I hope we can have further discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, very good. Now I'd like to turn over, if you'd like to come over here and take over my podium again. Stephen Coleman, you have 10 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me up here today. I am an attorney from Lansing. I'm a third-generation attorney. My grandfather was a circuit court judge. Oh, it's too far away. Okay. My grandfather was a circuit court judge in Ingham County down in Lansing for 30 years, and then my dad is currently a practicing attorney for over 30 years, and now I am the third generation. So I'm in a small practice firm with my dad and I, and we have a great time. We decided to start the Great Lakes Justice Center last year with a few other people, and we've gotten rolling on that. One of the big things that we started with was working on the RFRA issue, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, as we're trying to push that through. We've done work with Michigan Family Forum, Citizens for Traditional Values. We've even sided with the Michigan Catholic Conference on a lot of these issues where we agree. Now, I'm not going to be able to answer all the questions that we've certainly posed, and we'll have the Q&A to go over that, but I want to go through a few different things to begin with. I want to start with this issue of neutrality. It seems to me that that's the biggest thing that's been going around, and it seems that we're pushing that so much because we just have such a fear these days to offend anybody. We just can't offend anyone, so we got to be completely neutral. And a lot of times the neutrality is kind of used as a guise, as anything that's secular is okay, but anything that's religious is not. And so obviously we're here tonight to discuss these two issues of the sign and the cross on Dewey Hill. And basically what this comes down to is whether or not they violate the Establishment Clause, as I'm sure most of you are fully aware. Now, as an aside, all of us at the Great Lakes Justice Center, we've been following this story, and we reviewed Mr. Van Essen's memos, and we thought they were spot on in terms of the current diagnosis and analysis of the current status of the Establishment Clause jurisprudence. As flawed as it may be, it's really a complete mess, the Establishment Clause jurisprudence. The Supreme Court has completely screwed it up, to put it lightly. Now, various justices have been disagreeing on how to exactly enforce the Establishment Clause, and they've come up with different tests, and they're constantly fighting over which one should be used. The problem is there isn't much rhyme or reason as to which test they use. A perfect example of this is in 2005, where the last two major Establishment Clause cases were delivered. Both cases dealt with the displaying of the Ten Commandments in the public square. And the decisions were given out on the same day, and yet one decision said you can display the Ten Commandments, and the other decision said you can't display the Ten Commandments. So on the very same day, the court is speaking out of both sides of its mouth, and the main reason was because they used different tests for each case to determine what was okay and what was not. Just to give you an example, and some quotes from those decisions on what the current status and how messed up the current status of the Establishment Clause is. This is from the concurring opinion from Justice Clarence Thomas in the 2005 case that said the Ten Commandments are okay. He said, "The incoherence of the court's decisions in this area renders the Establishment Clause impenetrable and incapable of consistent application. All told, this court leaves courts, governments, believers and non-believers alike confused." He went on to say, "The outcome of constitutional cases ought to rest on firmer grounds than the personal preferences of judges." In Judge Scalia's scathing dissent in the other case where they said it was not okay to display the Ten Commandments, Judge Scalia said, "Nothing stands behind this court's assertion that the government affirmation of the society's belief in God is unconstitutional except the court's own say-so." Now, in legalese, there is no more of a diss to a court to say you just made it up. And that is exactly what Scalia is saying. He's saying with your jurisprudence, with the Establishment Clause, it's there because you said so. So he really bashed them for that. Now, to find out where we came from with this, we really need to look at our history. Well, how did we get here? Well, one interesting thing is that the Bill of Rights didn't originally apply to the states. It only applied to the federal government. Well, that includes the Establishment Clause. So the Establishment Clause didn't apply to the states and local municipalities until 1947 when the Supreme Court said it did. So we've really only had these issues for the past 60 years. And since then, the court has tried and tried and tried and failed, I would argue, to come up with a clear and concise way to decide these cases. So, to put it lightly, I completely disagree with the current court's interpretation of the Establishment Clause. Now, I want to give you a few did you know about, because I think if we look back to when they passed the Establishment Clause, it might give some insight as to what was going on in the founders' heads at the time. Just these are a few examples. For example, George Washington added the presidential oath, "So help me God," at the end of it. The Supreme Court under John Marshall ordered that every session start with quote, "God save the United States and this honorable court." Another thing you can look at is what the first Congress did. The same first Congress that proposed the Establishment Clause. What did they do? In the same week that they proposed the Establishment Clause, they also passed legislation that hired paid chaplains for the House and Senate. The same week that they proposed the Establishment Clause. The day after they proposed the First Amendment, that same Congress went to George Washington, the president, and asked him to proclaim, quote, "a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of Almighty God." Congress asked for that. The same Congress that passed the Establishment Clause. And finally, President John Adams said in his farewell address, and I'm sure many of you have heard this quote before, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." I'm sure many of you have heard that quote. Now, this is just a sampling of what was going on at the time. And by the way, just so you know where I got all this from, all this information, all these quotes, it's from Scalia's dissent in the 2005 opinion. And he gives detailed citations for every single thing that I just told you. So, we obviously have a problem. What's the solution? How do we fix this? Well, I propose, and I would propose the solution is we follow Scalia's advice. Scalia has an alternative test called the coercion test. He would argue that we would scrap everything that we've done for the past 60 years and put the coercion test in its place. The coercion test would basically say this: the Establishment Clause will only be violated if one of two things happen. The first thing, if the government action provides direct aid to religion, that would tend to establish a state religion. So if the state of Michigan passed a tax to donate to Catholicism, that would obviously violate it. That's the first way. The second way is if the government passes a law or policy or something similar that would require people to support or participate in religion against their will. Well, those are very bright lines, and I think you could see if that was the test that we used, the Dewey Hill Cross and the sign at the park would not be considered a violation of the Establishment Clause. So, pragmatically, how do we get there? How do we get that to be the test? Now, here's the really interesting part. The way the court's set up right now, there's 9 justices, and normally it's 4 and 4, and then Judge Kennedy in the middle. And whichever way Kennedy goes, that's the way the court goes. That is normally the case, but that is not the case with Establishment Clause cases, because you know who has signed on with almost every single Scalia opinion? Judge Kennedy. So if you look at 2005, which is the last time the court really decided any of these major decisions, you had Judge Kennedy, Judge Scalia, and Judge Thomas all citing for a test like this. Well, what has happened since then? We now have Judge Alito and Judge Roberts. How many is that? That's 5. That's all we need to win, is 5. Now, I understand that Roberts has been squishy, and I'm kind of wondering about him too, especially about what he did with Obamacare, but that's a whole side issue there. But bottom line is that we potentially have 5 justices that want to correct what has gone wrong with the Establishment Clause over the past 60 years. So really, the question is, when can the Supreme Court get its next case to take this on? And so, I'm not going to take the time now to go through all this, but that's something that you need to consider when you're deciding whether or not you want to keep on fighting this battle and keep on pushing forward. You know, when the other side, when the ACLU or MACRA or whoever it may be, whenever they want to change a law, do they just sit by and say, well, that's precedent, we lost our case, we're going to go home? No, they keep on sending case after case after case, and they try and they try and they try until they get a change in the law that they want. So I don't think that we should stand by when we lose a couple fights and say, well, that's the status of the law, we should just give up.
Right on.
We need to do something, and we need to do something soon, why we still have these 5 justices, and we might very well have the 5 justices that we need to do it. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna lend to our next and final panelist, Brandon Hall, the remaining 36 seconds from Stephen's remarks. Okay, I've lost control of my space.
Okay, I want to make sure to get the mic right here. I don't want to get cussed out for that. Can everybody hear me? Good. Good evening. Thanks to my fellow panelists, Tyler and Mr. Van Essen and Mr. Coleman for coming, and for Mike and Jim for organizing it, and for all you guys for coming. I think we're all in agreement these are some pretty serious issues we're talking about. You know, it was 2 months ago tonight at almost this exact time, about half a mile away, the Grand Haven City Council was voting right now to remove the cross of nativity. And also the Coast Guard City USA sign is gone as a result. People forget that. But the way this got on the agenda was the day before New Year's Eve, 2 council members requested to be put on the agenda. So then the next day was New Year's Eve, and then the Friday of the weekend of New Year's. All of a sudden it's Monday, and Grand Haveners had no clue that this vote was even taking place until they read about it the next day in the Tribune. So the way this vote went down, it was dirty from the beginning. And they knew exactly what they were doing, putting it on the agenda that way. It was also a quasi-blizzard that night, too, that Monday. So they knew what they were doing. And basically, just like that, after 5 decades of tradition in Grand Haven, after just 5 months of controversy, it was gone. The nativity and the cross were gone. Mike, did you get the image I sent you earlier? Did you get a chance to get that? Okay. I had, we'll get to that later. So, why did this happen? Well, basically it happened because of Mitch Kale and his girlfriend or wife or whatever she is, Holly Huber, and he caused this stir, this problem. And then they found some people in the township, the Pleshers. So before there was MACRA, there was the Remove the Grand Haven Cross Facebook page, which is where they conducted their business. They actually admitted right on the Facebook page that the only reason they were proposing some of their politically charged displays was to intimidate council into removing the cross. And that's where I would very much disagree with Mr. Van Essen when he talks about that these people are not trying to bully. I think Mr. Kale has a proven record of bullying. It goes back from Hawaii and that he's brought here. And I want to delve into that in a minute because I think that's important, because if not for Mr. Kale, we would not be here, because no city resident has complained about the cross or nativity. There was an issue back in 1999 where the council decided to stop raising it as a part of July 4th celebrations because that was very public. But since then, the cross has only remained up 20 hours a year, 2 hours on a Sunday night from the end of May into August. 20 hours a year at a voluntary church worship service, worship on the waterfront, which no Grand Haven city resident has ever formally complained about to City Manager McGinnis. And by the way, City Manager McGinnis has said that he feels no one's civil rights are being violated. He said that multiple times. If you look at Mr. Kale, some of these quotes I can't even repeat, they're so profanity-laced. But one of them, a volunteer minister, that's like being a volunteer panhandler. What the F do they do? Except hold their hands out for money. They're effing losers. He's talking about volunteer ministers. So they're effing losers. Mother Teresa was a fraud. Catholics are the worst. If God's in charge, he's one major F up. Tell me, why do Christians so consistently denigrate their notion of God? They make him out to be meaner than Hitler and dumber than Sarah Palin. Is this the best they can imagine? Just, I don't even want to go into too much of his stuff, but he says some very hateful things about Christians. For Mr. Kale, it's not about equal access or promoting the Constitution. He's got some deep hate in his heart against Christians. And I don't know if you remember Madeleine Murray O'Hare, the old famous atheist woman. She there was a reverend who wouldn't divorce his wife, so she turned atheist. That was her story. I don't know what Mitch's story is, but somewhere along the line, it took a negative turn. And I don't believe it has anything to do with the Constitution or anything that he claims. Because not just his words prove that, his actions prove it. You know, if you look at a couple things in Hawaii, he did dozens of things in Hawaii. Profited hundreds of thousands of dollars with lawsuits. He got $200,000 suing a church. The Hawaii legislature instituted a law that said if you can find fraud within Hawaii government, you can sue to reconcile that fraud, and you can actually get financially benefit from it. So Kale said, okay, these churches and schools have a fraudulent arrangement where the schools are giving the churches a good rent deal, and so we're going to sue and try to stop this. And he was able to pocket $200,000 off that. So when Mitch says there's not money in establishment cases, he says that all the time. He's managed to find it. So he actually got the Hawaii State Senate to stop their legislative prayer, which the prayer before the Senate would meet, they had a prayer. They call it aloha. And he went screaming into the Senate saying, oh, this is illegal, blah, 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 and actually dragged him out. And he got $100,000 off that, suing them, probably the best $100,000 Hawaii's ever spent. But a few years later, in Reese v. Galloway, the Supreme Court actually ruled that government meetings, municipalities can open their meetings with a prayer. And then one of the state senators in Hawaii is now fighting to bring that back after Mitch was able to, basically, he threatened to sue the Hawaii state legislature, so they ended the prayers. Perhaps, and I could go into dozens of things he did into Hawaii, but I think the most telling is there was a landslide in a public park, a state park, and a family was killed, a few members of a family. And they went, so the surviving relatives went and put some crosses beside the grave. And Mitch is so hateful that I would say he called up the Park Service, so this is establishing the Christian religion in this park, and he bullied the people into taking away the crosses, and all they were trying to do was remember their family members who had just been killed by a landslide. And the paper in Hawaii actually wrote an editorial about there. The papers in Hawaii finally got sick of Mitch's BS. I hope our local papers will eventually also figure this out. The Hawaii paper, the Honolulu Star Bulletin, said constitutional separation of church and state does not mean government property must be devoid of any manifestation of religion. 8 wooden crosses memorializing the victims of the 1999 Mother's Day rock slide at Sacred Falls in Oahu were an expression of First Amendment rights and not a violation of the same amendment's prohibition of government establishment of religion. The crosses were erected by grieving relatives and should be returned. Mitch Kale, president of Hawaii Citizens for Separation of Church and State, complained last month, because it's probably him and a couple people sitting there is what that is. Just like that's what MACRA is. MACRA is Mitch Kale and 6-10 other people. Mitch Kale and his group complained last month that the appearance of a government preference for Christian religion through the crosses. Kale's deduction was mistaken and is far-fetched to conclude that a cross seen at the location of a fatal traffic accident is anything more than a sign of a family's expression of grief. There's all sorts of things like that. Kale targets these people. The reason the anchor is there, actually, that was Mitch Kale's request from the beginning here in Grand Haven. From the very beginning, when he first complained in September of 2014, he requested an anchor. And he got an anchor. That anchor the Coast Guard never asked for that anchor. They don't want that anchor. It was Mitch Kale's idea to put that anchor up. The Coast Guard, I've talked to many Coast Guard members who are deeply offended. They say they've turned our anchor, in what's been a symbol of Coast Guard City, into a symbol of Mitch Kale's victory. Now every time I see that anchor, I'm going to be thinking of Mitch Kale and what he's done. I actually had someone message me that they met their wife by the Nativity. And all sorts of cool stories like that I've been able to hear. That's nothing to Mitch Kale. Grand Haven to Mitch Kale is just one more stop on his tour of hate and destruction. It's just one more stop. Within days of removing the Grand Haven cross, one of his cohorts posted off to Frankenmuth, and now they're looking at targeting the Frankenmuth cross. We've seen it recently, what's happening in Hudsonville. And so it's nice to know that the Ottawa County Commissioners were able to show some leadership, because no one else seems to be. And so originally the Parks Director after soliciting some feedback from the Parks and Recreation Board, they decided to take the sign down, and as we all know, the County Commission, thanks to the great leadership of commissioners like Dennis Van Dam and some other people, they put it back up. But that's the kind of leadership we need. One of the city council members, when they took down the Grand Haven Cross, said, the city needs to, the public needs to accept the fact we need to render unto Caesar's what is to Caesar's and what's God's. Well, as if the hill belonged to the city government. That's we, the people, the city of Grand Haven's hill. That's not the city government's hill. That's not they're the caretakers of it. That's our hill. That's our property. And to think that a cross, which this hydraulic cross, I'm almost done. I'll wrap up here. That hydraulic cross did start in 1964. But the original cross was put up in December 1962 by just regular Grand Haven folks who went up to the hill, and I think it was with some cable antenna or something, but Kevin Collier from the Tribune has uncovered that the original Grand Haven Cross was put up to celebrate Christmas by regular folks. And that's what the First Amendment is all about, regular folks going and expressing their views. And the courts have long held you can celebrate Christmas legally. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Brandon. And we're going to take 5 minutes now for my colleagues to gather the questions and comments you have and get them to me so that we can distribute them to the panelists. So just take a few minutes if you haven't already done so and write them on the 3x5 cards and then give them to Jim or Jean or Ray, who's moving around there and we'll get together in 5 minutes. Now, if any of you need the restrooms, they're outside. They're not in here. They're outside. You want to go into the corridor and turn left, and they're about 30 feet down the hall.
Great job. Thank you. I was just going to ask you your questions on the County Grease case. Which one? The County Grease case that came out May 5th last year. Oh, I know what that one is. Where is that one at? It actually was the religious prayer with Scalia and others. It came down May 5th last year, and it was a town of Greece.
Yeah, right here, it did a lot of that's not mine. Oh, I am.
I'm okay.
You're looking marvelous.
You're a friend of Steve.
Yeah, good.
Well, you get with the Great Lakes of the School.
Yeah, I can see us. Yeah. Oh, okay. There you go. He's a vet, but I might be a veteran. So he's a veteran.
That could be fun.
Really? Yeah. Big guy, too. Turned out to be fairly active. I was so busy.
Where are you guys? Where's your office?
You know, more people involved in the last minute.
Yeah, I'm in Lansing.
You know where like the course last week.
Yeah.
That's where
We're actually right at the Mountain Hole Conference. We just built a new factory across the street.
God bless you.
Yeah, that's right where we're at.
I'll have to swing on by sometime for lunch.
You defended me many years ago, Mary
Garzaloni.
and you have no idea how I tried to get a hold of you to thank you. And I called the Halson book telephone book. And no, we don't know, no. So I'm belatedly thanking you.
That is so funny. 11 years later. That's so funny. Well, it's really nice to meet you.
And God bless you.
Thank you.
I do believe you have, and I want to believe you have. Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Whatever the Lord provides, I'm grateful for it. So I'm just going to keep doing what I do, and I hope for the best.
Well, I'm glad that I finally got to thank you.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Because that was so neat.
Well, I really felt, that you were just attacking improperly. And, may not agree with everything that
I
you
know,
believe, but...
and you stated that.
Right.
But you and I've been attacked viciously because I made stands on things. It's okay.
Well, it's funny how the town left, how they like to attack.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I wish I had a card.
Actually, the next day.
Maybe you can write the phone number down for me or something, or do you have an email?
Yeah, yeah, and he literally, I mean, they don't usually do that on the food pictures or artists, but he had a long, conversation where he has to read the whole report. Anyway, I appreciate the chance to pass that. Yeah, and if, I know this gentleman here referenced what it said about the Caesar. If you get to the 2-hour mark, I take 4 to 2 minutes, and then you'll see my response to that.
You were like the only, you were the
I was
only
the
guy
guy.
there.
I was the guy.
You were the only one.
I was.
I remember
I
you.
was the guy.
And you said it was a joke.
Well, I walked up and I thanked you so much for taking all your time. But I did. I said to them that I didn't intend to be here. The point being that this was hoisted on us at the last minute. So I went down there and I said I didn't intend to be here. But I said, you know what? I used to try to make sure I could fight with my dad. He enjoyed doing that. I said, sometimes the guy who I wanted to win, sometimes the guy who I wanted to lose. I said, but I never ever saw that. So that was me. There'll be more chapters written on that. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I have no question that yeah. Well, and I probably disagree with you even on Vanessa, even though he called me an amateur constitutional, armchair constitutional authority. That was directed at me, which is okay. But even my dad had been my president. So I like people who do that. I think that they're all good and decent people who give them the kind of I was stunned that Mike did not fit on the other side of the mayor and Scott, that it wasn't 3-2. So I think you might want to call Vanessa. I wouldn't do that just because I know how hard most people work in to see my dad. When you walk out the building tonight, and you're in the foyer, and you see the plaque on the wall that says Mayor Creason, there'll be 4 other guys, one of whom is my dad. And so anyway, when I saw my dad for all those years, I'm not even sure how to take that. I'm not Creason, I'm going off Wallhouse. Yeah, so no, it's okay. That's right. But I did lose my dad, and that's right. It would be my dad's 90th birthday today. So yeah, so I'll take that as but I don't want to think about Ross Wallhouse. Yeah, so my name is John Wallhouse. Yeah, that's all right. No, I'm from Ross. Yeah. So anyway, because my dad was like the mayor for so many years, I recognize that it's a thankless job. Well, yeah, and I thought of everything else. It's so premature.
All right, has everybody got their questions in? We're going to get started here in a minute again.
Yeah, I was happy to be part of it. Yeah, that's right. Very nice to meet you. And I think, did you organize the motorcycle? Yeah, that was you. Yeah, that was you. I thought so. Yeah, we were there as well. Yeah. Well, I don't have a motorcycle, but we were there. So
That's fine. We're there.
Yeah, when
We didn't know if we were going to get 5 people there or 15. We got 500.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, my wife and I were there. I actually went to your office the next day to sign the thing. I missed you, but
But there was somebody there?
there was not. There was not. Yeah, but I been able to talk to some folks along the
Good.
way.
Good.
I think we'll talk again before this all is done.
This one too, she filled out the...
Okay, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. We have one more person who wants to get one more word in here, and then we'll get started.
It's not me.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right, I have not had a chance to preview all these questions, so some of them might be a surprise to me too. Well, this first question, this is meant for all four of the panelists. Nobody gets time off. Right. This is directed to all four of you, so you can take your opportunity to answer it or not. Which people determine what is in their city? The residents or somebody else? So which people determine what is in their city? The residents or somebody else? Does anybody want to take an answer?
Pretty broad question.
Yeah, okay.
I guess I'll try to bite that one off to start. The answer is both. We are representative government, which means that us as residents, no matter where we live, we elect people to represent us, and in this case it would be the Board of Commissioners and the City Council to represent you in your best interests, and then when an issue comes up, that's why they have the forums where anyone can come in and tell them what you think. The other side of that coin is that all of us as Michigan residents technically have the ability to sue the state government when they think there's been a violation of some law, or in this case, the Establishment Clause. And so Mitch here, he does have the right to sue under what's called a 1983 action against a state or local government to say you are violating the Establishment Clause. And so then it is up to our elected representatives, the City Council and the Board of Commissioners, to then weigh what's going on and say, are we going to listen to our residents and listen to what they have to say? And then they have to balance that with the potential costs of litigation. I don't know if any of you know, but with 1983 actions, there's always dangling over your head that if the person who's suing, if they win, they get attorney's fees. Which means that if you have a case that goes all the way to the Supreme Court or high up and it has all these attorney's fees, Mitch is going to get his attorney's fees paid for. And who pays for those attorney's fees? All of you residents. And so there's two sides to that coin. There's not a straight answer for that one.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously we're bound by our Constitution. You know, we're a constitutional democratic republic, so we're bound by our Constitution, and we can't, you know, just pass laws that violate people's rights, even, you know, if they're in the minority and the majority will vote for it. So there's that aspect, and then we have our state constitution, laws we have to follow from that, and then the legislature promulgates their laws, and we have to follow that. So within those confines, then we have our local governments who play their part. And in theory, for instance, I think our Grand Haven City Council is a great group of people. But did they represent the 10, 11,000 citizens of Grand Haven in their decision on the crossing activity? Or were they scared because of litigation and therefore were representing two people from out of the area? You know, so you can take this question a number of ways, but I think, yeah, I think it's a complicated process, and there's confines from the federal and state governments, but we do what we can, and this is really why I guess the importance of electing solid leaders that don't just say something, but you know they're going to fight for it. You know. That Hager Park sign, if it were not for the leadership of County Commissioner Dennis Van Dam, that sign damn well might not have came back. So it's important to have solid leadership at the local level, even if local leadership is constrained by other mechanisms.
Okay.
Just a quick selfless plug, I forgot to mention it when I was up there. There's brochures sitting over there about our Great Lakes Justice Center. Feel free to take one if you'd like more information.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say something? Okay. Okay. The next one is really a comment. It's not a question, but I think I have to include it. The comment is the founding principles didn't allow free market economics for Native Americans and people of African descent. There's no question in there, it was just a comment. Unless one of the panelists want to comment on that, okay.
Does the person who asked the question, do they care to elaborate?
I don't want to get into a back and forth, please. Our personal freedoms are on the brink of destruction. Are Americans ready to stand up for liberty or die trying? Do you personally think, this is a question to each of the panelists, where do you think Americans are today? Are they ready to stand up for liberty or face possible death? Are we at that point? And if we are Americans ready to make that choice? Somebody want to start with that question? It wasn't directed to anyone, it was directed to all four of you. Do you want me to read it again?
Raise a hand in this room.
It's a simple, straightforward question. Are we at that point, the choice between liberty or death? And if we are, do you think that your fellow Americans are ready to make that choice, or are they going to fold? Right.
Ultimately, only every American can answer that question, and so that's always a constant challenge to us as Americans to be able to answer that question. And we're up here because on some level we believe strongly that it's important to speak out, and for whichever perspective you take, it's important to be involved in the discourse, the creating of law, Supreme Court decisions. That's part of the public discourse. That's part of the culture. That's why it's important to talk about ideas, actually, because if law and the interpretation of it was simply a matter of I'm going to just look at the letter of the law, we wouldn't have any disagreement from the 9 justices. They would be always in agreement about everything. Justices of the Supreme Court and state Supreme Court justices and down the road, they're all influenced by culture. And that's why different parties in power choose different justices more along their cultural, their worldview approach. That's why having these conversations are important. And how do we change things? Legally, certainly. But we also change things just by having these conversations and by religious-minded people in the Judeo-Christian perspective, history. We come and we say, we contest this idea that again, there's this naked public square. There's no, and I would say as Christians, myself as a Christian pastor, I have to say there's no such thing as a naked public square. We have to fight that on some level and say everything communicates something. Everything communicates even a religious value on some deep, profound level. Everything communicates a religious value, a religious principle. And so we stand up for that. We have that battle. Sometimes it costs blood even. A lot of times, thankfully, it's the blood of politics and bloody politics. And we have to be involved on that level, no matter what your stripe. So,
I don't feel afraid in this country to speak my mind. I was alluding to the CNN special last night with the Russian activist who was murdered 10 days ago. And he, at one point, was vice premier of Russia. And he was murdered, probably by Vladimir Putin, for speaking in opposition to him. We live in a great country where you can have a forum like this. You can speak your mind and not be afraid of retaliation or certainly fear for your life. We are one of the bastions of that principle in the world. We're still that guiding light. So I think this country, we can be negative. Too often we're negative about the current state of the United States and what it stands for. I'm not negative. I'm optimistic and positive. We look to our founding fathers for inspiration. And I think our founding fathers would say to us on issues of abortion, issues like what Steve was talking about, maybe a different standard for First Amendment law as it relates to the religion. And they would say, we never intended that what we did in our Constitution and the Bill of Rights would never be amended. And I watch, you know, both people, both sides of the abortion debate, counting votes on the Supreme Court constantly, right? If we get this vote, if we get that vote, if we get that vote. And I thought Steve's presentation was very well done, and the law could change on the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. Of course, then again, it could change back if it were established in a certain fashion. So, to some extent, I think our founding fathers would say, why don't you try to amend the Constitution more regularly and address some of these issues as the people expressing themselves through the constitutional amendment? It's a tough process, to be sure. It was designed by our founders to be tough, but we don't use it enough. And so ultimately, these issues shouldn't be decided by 9 men and women on the Supreme Court. They should be decided by Americans crafting the Constitution for their age and for their particular values in their particular age. But I don't think any of us should cower from debate or should feel like we're in any way, in this country of all places on the globe, threatened because we may have an unpopular opinion.
I think lately, and maybe minus the past 5 years, but we had certainly taken for granted probably the past 50 years the liberties and the things that we've had. Certainly since the recent developments of this current administration, this current president, we've had a lot of issues that have awoken a lot of us. I believe I heard that the Ottawa County Patriots were formed in 2009. Well, obviously something woke you up and made you want to stand up and fight for what you believed in. And that's great. And so I do think that, yes, more and more and more every day, we are willing to stand and fight for our liberty. Just to give you an example, I live in Delta Township in Eaton County, on the west side of Lansing. Its township board is 6 Democrats and 1 Republican, and the Republican is not really a Republican. And he votes with the other 6 every time. Well, they proposed what's been going around this state a lot, to enacting a non-discrimination ordinance. And similar to what the Elliott Larson Act is, to protect sexual orientation, gender identity, and all of those things. And that's another debate for another day, and that's not what my point is. My point is that when they proposed this new city ordinance, the township woke up like I've never seen Delta Township wake up before. And a lot of that is to credit to social media, which is something that we didn't have 10 years ago. And at that meeting, which we only had 24 hours notice of that meeting, we packed the house. It was a bit smaller than this room, but there were 300 people that showed up, and it was standing room only, out the doors, all the way down the hall. And they were ready to pass that ordinance that night. But when 300 people, angry residents, showed up, they said, you know what, we're going to table it, we're going to let our attorney take a look at it. And something that they hadn't done up to that point, which was amazing to us, they hadn't even let their township attorney take a look at it. So our office prepared a 10-page legal memorandum of every error and reason why they shouldn't pass this ordinance at all, and if they were, here's changes that they should make. Well, they ended up adopting 15 out of, I believe, 16 or 17 proposals that we made, and it gutted pretty much all of it. And they ended up passing that. We would obviously prefer that they didn't pass anything, but they did pass something. But to have a board that was completely controlled by their side, our township woke up. And I think that's happening more and more and more as these things hit close to home. Before it's, oh, that's going on in Washington, oh, that doesn't affect me. And now all of a sudden we're having things that's a mile from us. And all of a sudden it's things that we took for granted for so many years, and you know what, it's too much. I'm seeing what's going on in Washington, and now it's hitting close to home, and I got to do something about it. And frankly, we need more of that. So I would applaud all of you, and again, thank you for letting me be here tonight.
I don't think we're to the point where people are quite ready to. You talked about having some sort of uprising, right? Was the question basically?
Well, we're ready to make the choice between liberty or death.
You know, I think people are frustrated. They see in Washington. You know, it's funny. Mr. Van Essen mentions Russia because Russia is currently housing Mr. Edward Snowden. It was revealed the government is spying on every single thing we do. They have a system actually where they take the illegal spying and then give it to local police departments, and then the local police departments don't reveal in court where they got it from, but they're using the illegal spying now into local municipalities. People pay their taxes and work hard, but GE, because of their connections in the government, GE got a tax break. GE got tax money back. GE didn't have to pay any taxes. Things like that, real Americans are ticked about that. I mean, it's an absolute joke. But I don't think we're quite ready to the point of having some sort of uprising or whatever. We got a lot of methods through the ballot box that we can still use, and that we haven't used them. I think Mr. Van Essen mentioned some. But there could come a point. You know, Dave Ramsey said the other day, you know, the government takes taxes out of people's checks. You know, so it's so easy. The taxes are so easy that, you know, you never see that money. He said if the government gave you your money and put a tax collector in front of your your workplace every week, there'd be a revolution in this country because people would see how much of their money that they earn is being wasted by this government and then given to special interests. So, but anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Okay. The next question is directed at Mr. Van Essen, but if the others would like to comment as well or encourage that. What specific Supreme Court of the United States citation concludes that atheism, or in your mind established that atheism is a religion? So again, what?
Sure.
All right, okay.
I actually can answer that.
Oh, okay.
That's a pretty specific question.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I do have the answer to that. It was in Justice Hugo Black's opinion in a case called Torcaso versus Watkins, where Justice Black found that secular humanism is a religion. So that's the particular case. I don't have the citation itself, but if you want to look that up, Google will tell you what the reference is, but it's Torcaso, Torcaso versus Watkins.
Yes, the all-knowing oracle will speak.
Michael, if I could address it just a little
Certainly.
bit too. This is beyond some of the legal question, but atheism is its own religion. And I don't know if I remember reading just recently, a few months ago, and this has been a little bit more recent. Maybe you saw this in the media, these atheist megachurches. Starting in England actually, and made their way over here into the United States. And it looks like a typical Sunday morning type of Christian megachurch gathering, except it's a gathering of atheists. And for so many of them culturally, they kind of miss going to church, and but they still want to get together. And they have a preacher, essentially, who preaches a doctrine of atheism. They sing songs, where they're not Christian hymns, of course, but they sing songs like, I printed off one of these, Lean on Me, and Here Comes the Sun. They sang it at one of these services. They passed an offering plate, essentially. They took an offering for their causes to promote it. And they celebrated when they made converts over to. Atheism is a religion. You break it down. What defines a religion? You could go, the world has a worldview, it has a system of orthodoxy. You can also be an apostate atheist. You can fall out of favor. They have their prophets. You have Nietzsche, you have Russell, you have Lenin, you have Marx. They have their Messiah, as some have said. Charles Darwin, for some of them, is essentially a Messiah for them. They have their preachers. They have their evangelists. They have a faith system. Someone who quote unquote, as professionally in the faith system, I look at this and I say, this is a religion. And that's why I say there is no such thing as a naked public square. Everything communicates something. It goes back to if you would have, why do they stage houses when they're trying to sell it? They don't leave them vacant. But because if you left a house vacant, it would communicate something for people who want to buy something. People know when they sell something, appearances say something. Architecture speaks. The lack of architecture, the lack of a sign, the lack of religious symbols, that says something, it communicates something. We as a culture have to start speaking that, and our legal system has to more speak that. Our justices have to start thinking that. There's no such thing as neutrality. There's no such thing as a naked public square. There is such a thing as wisdom principle. There is such a thing as learning to get along. We can talk about that later on.
I just want to let everyone know I have the site for the case. Torcaso v. Watkins, 367 US 488, and it was decided in 1961.
Did you Google that, or did you have that on Nexus Lexus?
That was Google.
The Oracle spoke again. Did anyone else want to comment? All right. The next question was meant for all of you, and I'm going to piggyback on it a little bit because in my mind it raised another question. Can we citizens buy the property that the cross is on, and should we? Now, that's the first half of the question, and I'm going to piggyback on that question and attack on the second part. Does that resolve the issue in your mind, or does it just kick the can down the road? So, two parts, one from the audience, one from me, your moderator. Can and should we buy the property to get the cross back up? Should we buy Dewey Hill and get the cross back up into private hands? Does that resolve the issue, or does it just kick the can down the road?
Well, that is always an option. Once property becomes private property, you can pretty much display whatever you want on your private property. If you want to put a cross up on your private property, you have the absolute right to do so. So if the city decided that it didn't want to deal with this issue anymore and it wanted to sell it to a private party, would that have the end result of being able to restore the cross? Yes, it absolutely would. Would that end any potential legal dispute? Most likely it would, because it's now on private property. But that's only half the question. The other half of the question is, would you want to do that? Because the second half of the question is this where you want to draw the line? Is this where you want to have the battle? Is this where you want to say, no, we're going to leave it public property and it's fine the way it is? Now, I believe there's something a bit distinctive about the cross situation that I haven't quite seen in other Supreme Court cases. In all the other Supreme Court cases, whenever there's monuments or symbols or things like that, they're always permanent in some form or another. Either they're a permanent monument where they're there, and no matter when people are there, they always see it. Ten Commandments or whatever it may be, which the court has struck down or sometimes upheld. As an aside, I do think it's kind of funny. I visited the U.S. Supreme Court about 2 years ago, and they always talk about they have the Ten Commandments up in the frieze above the Supreme Court, but they say, oh, that's with other secular things, so it's okay. But what they never talk about is there are giant 12-foot doors that go into the Supreme Court itself, and on the Supreme Court doors themselves, on the back, are the Ten Commandments. By themselves, pretty much. There's like one or two other symbols, but it's pretty much just the Ten Commandments. They never talk about that, and they always leave those doors swung open so no one ever sees them. That's just an aside. But back to the cross, that situation's different. Even when you look at nativity scenes, even though they're up for only a few weeks at a time, they're up for 100% of the time during those few weeks. So no matter who's going through the Capitol or the City Council building or whatever it is, they're going to see the nativity scene. What's slightly different about the cross is that it was only up for the 20 hours per year when that certain group rented it. And while, yes, it was permanently affixed, it wasn't permanently visible. And that's something slightly different the court has never specifically addressed, to my knowledge, which is something that could be distinctive and maybe more of a case of first impression, as it's called, And maybe another reason to have the court look at it and say, well, this is kind of different. Maybe we should carve out an exception here or change the rules or whatever it may be. So I think the cross is quite a bit different. As opposed to the sign, the court has decided cases that are either exactly or very, very close to what's going on with the sign, because that's up 100% of the time. But with the cross, that's different. That was only up when that place was rented, and otherwise it was taken down and not seen by the public. So that's a whole different issue. So I would argue in favor of not selling it to private property and fighting the good fight, but that's just me.
Dewey Hill is 40 acres. Dewey Hill is huge, and it's extremely valuable. You better be, I think Mr. Van Esten mentioned Dick DeVos earlier, you better be Dick DeVos if you're going to be buying that hill, right? So I think to think that the same city council who wanted to avoid a lawsuit, and so they got rid of the cross, to think that same council could even think of selling the hill is ludicrous. City Manager McGinnis has said the hill is not for sale and it will never be for sale, and I believe him when he says that. I think Mr. Coleman makes a good point. Well, why should it have to be for sale? It is already, we the people of the city of Grand Havens, it's already our hill. Why should we have to rigmarole around with it? It's already our hill. And I think I'd love to see this litigated out, and I think it will be, because to say that it's establishing the Christian religion to have a cross up 20 hours a year at a voluntary church service, that's ludicrous. And by the way, is that going to be next? Is worship on the waterfront? Is the church no longer going to be allowed to use that? Is the city endorsing them by letting them rent the space? How far does this go? So no, I don't think it's for sale, and I don't think we should purchase it if it ever were to even come to that. With the composition of council, that would take you'd be more likely to have the votes to defend the cross in nativity in court than you would, to sell it. So just getting the votes to defend the cross is hard enough. Imagine trying to get the votes in council to sell it. So that's my thoughts on it.
I forgot to say one analogy. I don't mean to be monopolizing the time up here, but
let me just interject that we're halfway through the hour, okay, and I've got lots of questions.
I'll be real quick.
Maybe they're not interesting. I don't know.
I think the cross could be equated to an analogy where you see all across the country where churches will rent public places, schools, to hold their services on the weekends. And that's totally fine. And so these public schools will be able to hold religious services on Sunday morning. That's no problem. So would anyone have any problem if, while those religious services are renting a public school, if they have a cross up during their service and it's taken down when they're done? Would anyone have a problem with that? No, they wouldn't. And they would be found to be completely fine to do that. So how is that different than what we have here?
Okay. The next question, I'm going to give Mr. Van Esten first opportunity to answer it, but it's not directed specifically at him. But as I read the question, it seems like the member of the audience was thinking about what Doug said. The First Amendment, does it apply to individuals and not communities? That was, and Doug was clear in his interpretation. It applies to individuals. It doesn't apply to communities. So, given that, what about the Citizens United decision, which gave explicit rights of expression to businesses via donations? That's clearly not a human individual, as you were suggesting. So, there's the question. And we can start with Doug, but if the other panelists would like to comment, that'd be good.
Yeah, I think what I said earlier was the Bill of Rights. So we talk about free speech.
Freedom of expression, yes.
Yeah, free speech, freedom of expression is not considered to apply to municipalities or governmental entities.
Can't hear back.
I'm sorry. The Bill of Rights generally is not considered, the particular rights inherent in there, like free speech, are not considered generally to be something that belong to municipalities. Steve may disagree with me on that. Certainly the Establishment Clause has been extended to governmental entities to to recognize. And so local units of government have to recognize the rights of you as individuals in the Bill of Rights. But the Bill of Rights themselves, to my knowledge, have never been extended to the municipalities. So, for example, the municipality could sue under Section 1983 and say our rights are being violated by the state of Michigan or the United States government.
Steve, you want to address that?
This is kind of a tricky question, and I was actually just having a discussion about this very issue with our president, William Wagner, who's a constitutional law professor. He was at Cooley, and now he's at Trinity International in California at their law school. And we were talking about this very issue about, does the government have freedom of speech? And I would agree with Mr. Van Essen that it doesn't apply to people personally, but I guess it's more nuanced than that. Because if you look at the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights, in my opinion, don't grant any rights in and of themselves. They are just protections against what the government can do against rights that we already have. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, we are endowed by these rights by our Creator, and we have them automatically because we are living and breathing. The First Amendment simply limits what the government can do to rights that we already have. And so when we get together and form municipalities and form governments, I don't think we lose our freedom of speech, but it does get more nuanced and detailed than that. And what I mean is, and this is the way Professor Wagner put it, the government can say whatever it wants, unless it violates some particular law or statute, and in this case, the Establishment Clause. So the government can put up a cross as long as it doesn't violate the Establishment Clause. And that is the question that we have to answer today, is whether or not it violates the Establishment Clause. Not whether or not the government has the right to say it, but whether or not it violates the Establishment Clause. So I know it's very similar to what Mr. Van Essen said, but I think it's slightly different.
I think there was actually a case in Hawaii where Mitch Kale, there was the state legislators wanted to put Christian crosses on their office doors. And Mitch Kale said that's illegal and unconstitutional for a state senator or a state representative to put that cross on his door. So he went and vandalized their doors, putting up various Darwin symbols and things. And then it got litigated in Hawaii, and the Hawaii courts ruled that agents of the government they have free speech. So I think apparently municipalities themselves don't have free speech, but agents within the government do have free speech. And if you look, I know Mr. Coleman and Mr. Van Essen would be much more familiar with this, but like Nottely v. Lynch is a case where they had a nativity scene put up, the city of Pawtucket, New York, and people challenged the city of Pawtucket and said, you know, that nativity is offensive and we don't want it up. And the court ruled, well, the city does have the right to display that nativity. So it seems as though the courts have given municipalities rights through various rulings. I don't know if they have any inherent right to them, but it seems as though they've been given some sort of rights. I don't know how you would address that, but you'd probably be better to it than I can. But Supreme Court rulings have given cities and municipalities the right to celebrate federal holidays and to celebrate these things, so they obviously have some sort of rights.
Okay, the next question is for the Reverend Wagenmaker. But again, if the other panelists want to comment as well, I encourage them to do so. Do you think Christians have been silent for too long? There's no nuance in that question.
I'm silent. Have Christians been silent for too long? That in itself is an excellent question that as Christians and the Christian community, we have to keep having that internal Christian community debate. I know among clergy, there are a variety of opinions of how do you interact with the society that you live in. And render unto Caesar what is Caesar, unto God what is God's. What does that look like? There's a variety of opinions within clergy and churches. That's why a lot of times, sometimes churches are silent, ministers are silent, because they say that's not our domain, that's really not our area. We just want to love Jesus, and we just want to be the church, and so, and be quiet and quiet in living our lives in kind of peaceful ways. That's how we want to make a difference. And so, it depends what you mean again by Christians been silent. I think most Christians would say I'm not silent. Some Christians are very public with their voices. Other Christians, and we trust all Christians, are very public with their actions and how they live their lives. And so, do Christians need to be more not silent with their voices? I would contend that we do. But that's not in a vindictive way, that's not in an angry way. That's more in, we're becoming a minority in our nation, and so we need to help you, our fellow citizens around us, understand what we believe, why we're passionate about it, why we love Jesus, why the cross is so important, why historically that means a lot, and why that can be a blessing to you, as it's been a blessing to many others who, we say have had the blessing of coming in contact with Christians throughout the ages. Does the church, the Christians have a spotless record? Certainly not. I love history, I know history. But on the whole, the world has been blessed by Christians. And so sometimes it's just raising our voices to make that known and to say, having a cross up is not a threat. We're a loving people. We're continuing to be checked by our pastors, by God's word. What does it mean to love? We're still working on that. That's the process of sanctification, becoming more like Jesus Christ. That's that Christian walk. And so, every age has to answer that question in its own unique way.
Okay. Does anybody else want to comment? Okay. Next.
Oh,
okay. I'm sorry. All right. The next. All right. I want to give him another. Obviously, Doug wants another question. I got to pull one right in. A little bit out of order here. I am a Grand Haven resident, and I want the Ottawa County Commissioners to give me my rights back to have the cross and sign put back up. What are you, now I don't know if it's talking about you personally or the Ottawa County Commissioners, what are you going to do to help me get my rights back? Do you want me to read it again?
I don't know if the questioner appreciates that Dewey Hill is Grand Haven city property.
Yeah, I think he probably does, but he's probably also imagining that Grand Haven is still a part of Ottawa County.
Well, I don't think that Ottawa County Board of Commissioners can overrule, as a matter of law, what Grand Haven City Council does with Grand Haven city property. I mean, we have various layers of government, and it's important that all of those layers respect each other's jurisdiction. So that ball is squarely within the court of the people of Grand Haven and their elected city council.
Okay. Did anybody else want to comment? Otherwise, I'll go to the next question.
Can you read the question?
I'm a Grand Haven resident, and I want the Ottawa County Commissioners to give me my rights back and to have the cross and the sign put back up. What are you going to do to get my rights back?
Well, thankfully, the sign is coming back up in Hager Park. The county commission voted for that. And as Mr. Van Essen points out, it's a separate municipality. The county commission has no authority over the city of Grand Haven. They could, in theory, pass a resolution saying, hey, we support the cross and nativity, and it was unfortunate that the Grand Haven City Council voted to take it down. I know Representative Huizenga and State Senator Meekhoff have expressed disappointment about what happened here in Grand Haven, and certainly the county commission could vote as a resolution and say we're disappointed in that too. So they can't force Grand Haven to do anything, but they could certainly pass a resolution that says, we don't approve of what's going on here. So, as far as what we're doing about it, I know in Grand Haven I'm trying to get the composition of city council changed, so we have the votes there to bring that cross and nativity back. And I think that cross is going to be coming back a lot sooner than people would think, but it's going to be coming back. I guarantee you that.
Could you give him back the microphone? This next question is for Brandon. Why did the city not allow us to vote for for or against the cross? Is the reason there was no money? You, the city, have no problem begging for money for the fireworks, for other items here. So, if it was a matter of expense, then why does the city beg for money for fireworks and so forth? And if it's not an expense, why didn't the city turn the question over to the whole community? Wasn't that the better thing to do?
The fireworks are actually privately funded, but they do have a few million around to get a new city council building. So there's that. So I actually wanted to do this before. I love Bob Benetz. He's a great councilman, and I never, besides his vote on the cross and a couple other random things, he's served Grand Haven very well as a council member. And so what I did when I found out this vote on Monday night, I was shocked. I was talking to someone who was at the meeting covering it, and he let me know, yeah, they just voted to, take the cross down. And so I was at City Hall the next day. I said, she was asking me a lot of questions, and because what I wanted to do was place before Grand Haven voters something that would basically enact, hey, we want to defend the cross and nativity in court, and basically put that to a voter question. Well, the city clerk, Linda, called the county clerk, Justin Roebuck, and got some guidance on this issue. And what it turns out is it's against the law to, it's called an advisory question. It's against the law to, you can't place an advisory question on the ballot because the law says the city council should do their job and that people shouldn't have to, come out and do city council's job for them, that this is in the purview of council. So that was why it could not be taken to a vote of the people, is because it's called an advisory question, and according to Attorney General Schuette and County Clerk Roebuck, that's not legal. So hopefully that helps a little bit. But I did try that route first, and it's unfortunate it didn't work out.
Okay. Next, as I read these questions, I put little captions over the top of them in my mind. I'm not writing on these. And this one is kind of labeled "slippery slope" on my mind here. I wonder how long it will be until crosses on church property are offensive, or being observed to read a Bible in a public place is deemed offensive. What if, when is it, a prayer in a public place? I just want to, in case you don't remember, we began this particular forum with a prayer. When will that be judged offensive? What about if somebody just wears religious jewelry and that's viewed as offensive? So where does it end? Are we on a slippery slope? Anyone?
I guess, again, I'm optimistic that the First Amendment is there to protect the free exercise of religion. And as much as we, from time to time, don't like decisions made by our courts have been very supportive, as they must, under the First Amendment, regarding the free exercise of religion. So, I think the court system that we have would vigorously protect the free exercise of religion. I don't see any softening in the courts. In fact, just the opposite. There have been cases, including one out of New York City, which have defended the I-beam cross that emerged from the 9/11 wreckage. and it indicated that to many people after 9/11 who witnessed that I-beam cross emerge from the wreckage, that was a moving and powerful event. And there were religious services that were held underneath that I-beam as the workers preserved it. And as they cut it loose from the wreckage and preserved it so that it could be permanently installed in the 9/11 museum, and the courts found that exercise of religion was not only appropriate in that carnage, but it was also appropriate that particular artifact be preserved, unlike in Mosul, Iraq, that it be preserved in the 9/11 museum. So the courts are there. We should not fear that the courts will protect in this country the free exercise of religion. And Steve, I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm quite confident that our judges will protect that.
You know, Mr. Van Essen and I, before this all started tonight, we were off talking to the side, and we were both commenting on just the cultural change in how we no longer live and let live, and that we can't agree to disagree anymore. And I almost see this issue more of a cultural issue than a court issue, where our culture has changed so much where we can no longer agree to disagree. And it's funny, I was just watching a couple episodes of Seinfeld the other day, and some of the issues that they were talking about, I was thinking they could not do this episode today like they did in the 90s. It would be considered too offensive, Seinfeld. And so that really concerns me. And what also concerns me is that while yes, I think as the laws stand right now, we're pretty protected. What concerns me is if those laws change. And the laws always reflect what culture is doing. And for an example of how this can hurt us is all these non-discrimination cases, I call them SOGI laws, sexual orientation, gender identity. Just as an example, out in New Mexico, there was, a lot of you have probably heard of it, the photographer out there, where she was asked to take the photography for a homosexual wedding. She politely declined, found a replacement photographer, but she was still sued under New Mexico's non-discrimination ordinance. It went all the way to the New Mexico Supreme Court. The Supreme Court had to weigh two things, because they had to weigh her right to freely exercise her religion, which is constitutionally protected, versus the non-discrimination statute in New Mexico. And you know what the court said? The non-discrimination ordinance wins over your right to exercise your religion. And she lost. That's what concerns me, is that we're going to be changing the laws, which then undermine our protections until they're eventually gone. So I do see a slippery slope forming, but it's mainly coming from the culture informing everything, not so much from the courts. So that's what really concerns me.
I think we're definitely on a slippery slope. We see it right in our own backyard. You know what's going on right now with the cross and Hager Park, Hudsonville. You know, that little Bible trailer out front, and now they've kicked that out. Mitch Gale's looking at Frankenmuth, looking at other things in Grand Haven. We're on a slippery slope. The question is how much are we going to be pushed? Are we going to be pushed right off the cliff? You know, and what good are our laws that are protecting, you know, our religious rights if, you know, for instance, the Grand Haven City Council says, we can't have that lawsuit. It's, you know, even the city attorney for Grand Haven said that they would probably win the case if it went there, but they just didn't want to hassle with the lawsuit. So what good are our laws if one person from out of town can come in and basically, via lawsuit, threaten the whole town? What good are our laws then? It's not protecting Grand Haven, it's not helping us. So I think, and it's hard to limit, you know, you can't really limit Mitch Gale's right to go and do these things, then you're hurting other people. So basically, you know, there's an old Kenny Rogers song, and he said, you know, sometimes you gotta fight when you're a man. And you do. Sometimes you gotta knuckle up and fight, and it's just the way she goes, but you gotta do it.
Okay, can I mention something just a quick second?
Absolutely.
in terms of the slippery slope, and I think it was mentioned about the importance of culture, and that's why this is a cultural issue. And the laws, court opinions, justices who grow up in the cultures, they just reflect the culture that we live in. And there is a growing hostility to specifically even Christian displays. I think here in Ottawa County, I just looked online again, we have 38 parks and open space and natural areas. We have, 3 courthouses, we have health departments, we have community mental health places, we have fire departments, police departments, city halls, city township parks, green spaces, road right-of-ways, roads, signs, multiple school districts and buildings. We have baseball fields and diamonds, we have official letterheads, we have all this, all government stuff. What did we have? Two religious types of expressions. You travel all there, there's very little overt Christian, let alone religious type of expressions. And yet, with all of that, with only a small sign, most people didn't even know was there in Hager Park until this thing came around. And across it's up for a couple hours for every year. The antagonism against it. This isn't a hostility. This is an aggression. And this is not a benign sort of let's uphold the First Amendment sort of approach. So it can be a slippery slope if the culture allows it to be, and if the culture pushes it even more. And that's why it's important of the battle of ideas. What the Ottawa County Patriots does engages on the battle of ideas, the talking and thinking. Why education is important. Why religious expression is important, not just in the walls of a church, but as it's lived out in our conversations and our ability to live with each other and to agree to disagree sometimes, even vigorously.
All right. We have less than 10 minutes. I just want to get 2 more questions on the table. So here comes one. I know that there's one right after that. If a cross is a religious symbol pushing religion, what about all of the crosses on the graves of our soldiers in Arlington National Cemetery? If your reasoning applied to Dewey Hill, as you explained it, how would you apply that to the crosses that are in Arlington National Cemetery?
I can only speculate that the courts would view those crosses, and I think there are Stars of David over some graves. I think they would view that as a personal expression of the soldier who gave his or her life for this country. And those are individualized expressions that would fall under the First Amendment's right, even though it's government property, for the individual who's buried there to give a lasting display of their particular religious faith. And obviously, as of this point in time, we haven't hit that slippery slope yet, where the courts have rejected that. And maybe I'm an eternal optimist here, but I would like to believe that the courts of the United States would support the right of any person who has given their life to display a religious symbol on their tombstone that reflects their particular faith. You were a soldier.
Well, yeah, but he's not buried in Arlington.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, the government pays for those headstones, and so I guess you could probably make a legal case. You could have that free expression if you wanted a cross. We're going to remove all the crosses, and we're just going to put, just a blank thing. If you want a cross there, your family can pony up the money, I guess, the descendants of it, and you can have that cross, and you can pay for it out of your own pocketbook. I guess you could maybe even make a case that you could sue the government and say the government has bought that and bought their crosses. You don't know necessarily they're even Christian. There have actually been lawsuits, I know, about that. So we're not there. Could we be there? I guess if someone is aggressive enough and is litigious enough, we could be there. And I wouldn't put it past someone like, and I don't want to disparage Mitch, we pray for him actually, but I I think that's the best thing Christians can do, is just show love, the love of Jesus Christ to someone who, as it was, as was mentioned in some of his quotes, he hates Jesus and his followers, and on some fundamental level, we just show the love of Jesus. Yeah, we could get there.
Okay. This is the last question. It's from a member of the audience. Remember that? No, it's, maybe you took that the wrong way. That's because he made some editorial changes here in this question. What can I do to help keep the cross and the sign? What steps do I take? So Tyler, can we start with you?
I won't address the legal things. I'll let this go down this way. But I would say, certainly, as individuals, as Christians who are passionate about that, you're praying. The prayer of a righteous man is effective, is powerful. This is in the book of James. And so we can pray about it, and we can look for, in many wonderful ways, actually, what Mr. Van Essen said before the Board of Commissioners. That's not stopping us from Christians from displaying crosses in our front yards. In many ways, that can be a call of revigoration for individuals to say, maybe I've been too quiet about my faith, how important it is. And this is an opportunity, this is a personal challenge maybe for me to be more expressive in my conversations, in my lifestyle, in how I run my business, and what people see when they drive past my house and or my business. And so I would say on the religious side, that's something that can be done.
I guess you can come up and live where I live in the city of Muskegon, because I live right off of Pierre Marquette Park, and we have a Christian religious music festival in Pierre Marquette Park every summer. We have every Labor Day there is a barefoot in the park religious service, a non-denominational Christian service in Pierre Marquette Park. So I would agree with the Reverend on this. There was one comment that I heard at the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners, one of the meetings, that I thought was very moving to me personally as a Christian. And this individual was speaking in favor of the reestablishment of the sign, but she said, Jesus taught us that those messages primarily must rest in our heart. And she was absolutely right. So she prefaced her remarks saying, I hope to put the sign back up, but I want you to know that primarily all of us must carry these messages in our individual hearts. And that's absolutely correct. There is nothing to prevent, in fact, there's everything under the First Amendment to protect the free exercise of religion in our public parks. You can wear a t-shirt displaying the cross in our public parks. You can ask and be granted the right to worship in our public parks. So the First Amendment, and Steve, I think, will verify this, is commonly described as a two-edged sword. Yes, there's an anti-establishment clause in there, but the other end of the sword is the free exercise of religion, and we carry that edge, and perhaps we don't exercise that edge as individuals as much as we can. So I would echo Reverend Wagmaker's, I think, call to personal action with respect to our public places. I think that's the most powerful statement any one of you can make.
I would agree wholeheartedly with what was just said. I think it's Proverbs 20, somewhere in Proverbs 20, I'm going to butcher this by memory, but basically says that God controls the heart of the king like a river, winding river. And, well, who is the king in America? We don't have a king. We are all the king, essentially. And so the people that we elect our leaders, and those are the people that God can control their hearts. So I think prayer